concern grows for the aging Queen's health, thoughts now unfortunately turn to what will happen when the time comes and she dies, and what her funeral will be like. Adored by many people in the United Kingdom, the Queen's passing will leave many people wanting to know how they can pay their respects. She will of course be greatly missed, and there is already a timeline of events in place for when Her Majesty dies. But what's going to happen at her funeral? Here's what we know. What happens when the Queen dies? After the Queen dies, the entire country will go through a 10-day mourning period. On the 10th day of mourning, the Queen's body will be moved to Westminster Abbey for a state funeral. The service will be led by the Archbishop of Canterbury and will be attended by the royal family and state officials from all over the world. The funeral will also be coordinated by the armed forces and government. The night before, church services will be held around Britain, with larger towns and cities holding memorial services in sports stadiums and public venues. What will the Queen's funeral be like? The Queen is expected to have a state funeral. A state funeral is a public funeral ceremony, observing the strict rules of protocol, held to honor people of national significance. State funerals usually include much pomp and ceremony as well as religious overtones and distinctive elements of military tradition. Generally, state funerals are held in order to involve the general public in a national day of mourning after the family of the deceased gives consent. A state funeral will often generate mass publicity from both national and global media outlets. Big Ben chimes at the start of the day. On the day of the Queen's funeral, Big Ben will chime at 9 a.m. and her body will be taken from Westminster Hall to Westminster Abbey. A procession will take place, with members of public lining the route to pay tribute to the monarch. Her body will arrive at 11 a.m., with the royal family and around 2,000 invited guests, COVID permitting, in place ready for the ceremony, which will be television around the world. Inside the Abbey, the Archbishop will speak. During prayers, broadcasters will refrain from showing the faces of the royal family. At midday, as the religious service ends, there will be a 2-minute silence across the UK. The Ministry of Defence will also arrange for gun salutes to take place at saluting stations around the country. A procession will then take place in Windsor, with fans lining the route as the Queen makes her way to her final resting place. Where will the Queen be buried? Following the funeral, the Queen will also have a committal service in St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. Although the world will have been watching up until this point, the committal itself will be a private affair. Then she will be buried in the castle's King George VI Memorial Chapel, alongside her husband, Prince Philip. Her mother, father and sister Princess Margaret are all buried in the Memorial Chapel. It's thought her coffin will be similar to that of Prince Philip. He was buried in a lead-lined English oak coffin specially made for him 30 years before his death. Members of the royal family are buried in lead-lined coffins because they help preserve the body for longer. The lead makes the coffin airtight, which stops moisture getting in. It's thought the coffins preserve the body for a year. However, it also makes them very heavy. In fact, Princess Diana's coffin weighed 1/4 ton. Will the Queen's funeral be a bank holiday? The country will be given a national day of mourning on the day of the Queen's funeral. However, although banks and the stock market will be closed, it doesn't necessarily mean Brits will automatically be given a day off. The government won't rule that employers have to give members of staff the day off. Instead, it will be at their discretion and something discussed at each individual place of work. What if the Queen dies abroad? Even though it's highly unlikely that the Queen will die abroad, there's a protocol in place just in case. If the Queen dies abroad, a coffin will be flown out to her. A Bay 146 jet from the RAF's No. 32 Squadron, known as the Royal Flight, will take off from Northolt, at the western edge of London, with a coffin on board. In fact, royal undertakers Leverton Sons keep a first call coffin ready, in case of royal emergencies.